Welcome to Viewpoints, powered by Equiture, a company that believes public safety drives everything, from education to economic development. We sought out to develop a platform where experts from across the country can discuss their ideas and touch topics from across the industry. Welcome to Viewpoints. Today we're going to sit down with Sherry Bartram. She was the 911 director over at Sarisa over in southeastern Michigan. She's had a lot of experience, over 30 years of experience as a 911 professional in the industry. We're going to go ahead and just have some discussions about her experience, her career, and her life in this profession. So Sherry, just to start us off, can you give us an idea of what year you started, when you started doing this? When you started doing 911 and everything?
Thank you, Zach. I started my career in 1983. I had my first job in Lakewood, Colorado. At that time, I was the baby of the department. But when I ended my career at Sarisa, I had just hired someone who was about 6 years older than my granddaughter. It was just an amazing career.
Just 6 years older than your granddaughter?
Right. So
that's crazy. That's very interesting.
When I hired the first person who was born the year I graduated from high school, I started thinking, oh, geez, this is something. Hiring people when you started the career as the baby. I was a part-time call taker when I first started, and I just worked my way up. So it was really great. Watching that progression and the things that have changed in 911 over these past 38, 39 years, and public safety as a whole, I've been involved in for over 40 years. So the changes have just been amazing.
That is insane. Now, question for you: how did you even get the idea of joining 911 at that age?
Well, that's funny that you say that age. Yeah, I was pretty young when my mom was a 911 dispatcher in Michigan, and I always thought it was really cool to watch her dispatch. And back in those days, they had a great big, they call them a French fry mic, a great big mic, and she would push the button and talk to the officers, and I'd hear the citizens calling her, and I thought that was really cool. And then when I turned 18, I started working at the local ambulance in the public safety, and I really liked that as well. But then I decided when I was 19 that I thought I knew better than everybody else in the whole world, because that's what we do at that age. And I moved to Colorado, and I just started applying at different places. And I, as someone in 911, because I figured, well, government jobs are safe and secure, and I'll have a good income, and I think it's kind of cool. And I got that first job, and then I was just sold. It was just it's been an adventure.
Of course. So going a little bit back to when you were back in Michigan, you got it started with your mom. Now back then, was it like bring your daughter to work days? You get to shadow your mom when she was working there? Did you just get this love to want to do it?
No, back then things were not as locked down as they are nowadays, and it was in a small town in Michigan, Holly, Michigan, and I would ride my bike into town, and that's how young I was, and she'd be working, and I could just stop by and use the restroom if I needed, and get money for a snack before I rode my bike back home. And I know nowadays when we bring people in, there's all these forms and permission slips and background checks, but really back then, it was quite different. And we're talking maybe 50 years, maybe not quite 50 years, but things were very easygoing because we didn't have all of the concerns that we have nowadays.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. So at the age of 19, that's when you said you moved to Colorado, correct?
Correct. Yep, I packed up everything I owned, which, 19 years old wasn't much, and my cat, and I just drove west and didn't know anybody there. And I ended up at a hotel in a not good area of Denver. Um, and I called my dad on a payphone because that was before cell phones. And I said, it's scary here, and Denver is not really mile high, and there's no mountains around, because if you're from the flatlands and you have never experienced the mountains, I didn't really realize that I had gone up in elevation a whole mile. I could see the mountains, what I envisioned the mountains would look like in the distance, but I wasn't close to them. So he found that I had cousins there, and he got a hold of them, and he gave them my number, and I gave me their number, and I called them, and they welcomed me into their home. But in the meantime, I had taken my cat and traveled through the mountains, and decided that there was one town that I wanted to live in, and that was Estes Park, Colorado, which is north of Denver, about 70 miles northwest. And it was I just fell in love with that. But I didn't go up there when I was looking for jobs, because I needed to stay close to my cousins, because they were kind of, they were instrumental in helping me with my career. If they hadn't been there, I probably would have, packed my bags and gone to where my dad lived in Florida.
So either Michigan, Colorado, or Florida. Such bad options, right? Pretty for pretty for pretty.
Yeah, I know. It's different though. Every state is, a little bit different in how they do 911 and public safety. When I went there, I'd only had the experience of watching my mom, and when I moved back to Michigan in 2006, I had a ton of experience by then, and I had to be really careful and stop saying, well, in Colorado, we did it this way, because, every state is proud of what they do, and that's just a big helpful thing I remembered, is to just not keep saying that, try and phrase it a different way so that it doesn't sound like that sounds when you hear somebody saying, well, in my old place we did this.
Right, right. So at 19 you moved to Colorado. When would you say you got your first official job as like a 911 dispatcher in 911 specifically?
Oh, that year. The year I moved to Colorado, I started in 911.
That year, and where was it at? What'd you do?
That was in Lakewood, Colorado, and I was a call taker, a part-time call taker, because there were no openings. And then from there, no full-time openings. And then from there, I went full-time call taker to, my goal was to be a dispatcher. And then I became a dispatcher, and, I just progressed up. And then when I moved to Estes Park, I started as a full-time dispatcher, and I became a trainer, and then a supervisor, and then their operations support manager. In that town, that person was over all the civilians. So, for people who want to be a director, you really can start on the bottom and work all your way up. And it gives you a nice, strong view of the profession when you've done that.
So you were getting management positions when you were out in Colorado before you moved back to Michigan in 2006?
Yes, I started my first management position in Colorado. I held that for 9 years, going on 10. And I decided that I needed to move back to Michigan because my parents were here, and they did not do well in the altitude, so they certainly couldn't move there. and they couldn't visit often because the altitude was really hard on them, especially where we lived in Estes Park. We were at 7,500 feet roughly, and
Wow.
it didn't, you know, for the people who live there, it doesn't feel like much. I'm a runner, so when I would run in Estes Park and then I would come to Michigan to visit, I felt like I could run forever. So you often will hear of people going to train in Colorado, and that's why you're just up higher and there's not as much oxygen. So when they go back down to sea level ish, it is easier to run and do sports.
Right. So when you came back to Michigan in 2006, how difficult back then was it to get another job in management in 911? Or did you take some time off, or did you go right back into work?
We didn't move back to Michigan until I had a job. So I applied for the job while I was in Colorado, and I flew out to Michigan to interview for it and was offered the position in St. Clair County, Michigan. Um, so, and that was a brand new center. They were moving it under the authority of the county as opposed to the sheriff's office, and so that's what they wanted me for. They wanted someone who could manage that transition, and then they were looking at consolidating within the county other PSAPs.
Okay, and what about you, like, specifically made them want you to be about this, or what made you feel like you were the proper person to come into the job to handle that project?
I had some really good mentors in Colorado, and I had a lot of training, and I was preparing for if we consolidated our centers in the county that I was living in, and some classes I'd taken. I just received earned my bachelor's degree while I was in Colorado, and I felt like with all my experience as a dispatcher and then in leadership, I thought, well, I know what we need to do, and I've wanted to work in a bigger center than what I was in. And I'd started in a big center, and then I was in a little center, and then, so I just thought, well, that would be a good progression. And I really like working with people and being able to make a difference. That's always been my motto. I just wanted to make a difference. So I thought that's me. And I just had a lot of different tools in my tool belt that they were looking for there in St. Clair County, and seemed like fairly close
Okay,
to where I needed to be.
right. So you said that when you're in Colorado, you're able to get your bachelor's degree, and you said in leadership. Is that correct?
Yes, I got it in management, actually, Bachelor of Science.
Okay, now management. Now, so you got that while you were currently working in 911 out there in Colorado, then, correct?
Yes, I earned my bachelor's degree raising 4 teenagers and working full time as the manager at the police department. So I was able to juggle that and get that done. A lot of really late nights, but it was important. It was important to the chief.
Wow. Now, important to the chief. Go ahead.
No, that's right. It was just important to the chief that his leadership have degrees.
Okay. Now, so when you went to go get your degree in leadership and everything, your bachelor's degree over there. Now, how important would you say that is to actually coming into a management position in 911? Would you say the college degree was very beneficial to you having it, or is it more about kind of like the having the paper under your name?
Gosh, that is a big question. Whether degrees are important or the experience is important. And having have now that I have both, and when I got to Michigan, I earned my master's degree. I I think the experience is important, but the master's degree gives you and the bachelor's degree, they give you uh, a a broad knowledge of other things besides just what you're doing, especially if you want to be in management, no matter where you're at. But in 911, we're so focused on public safety, which isn't bad. But the management degree helped me because there were so many other classes that I could take that expanded my knowledge, consulting and project management. Of course, financial classes are always good, and then just positive leadership classes. Those those are really important. And then you do a lot of writing in college, and I think that helped me a lot. I look at some of the documents I wrote early in leadership, and I compare them to now, and it's kind of laughable. Uh, Not that they were bad before, but just that all that experience, it really fine tunes you.
Oh, of course, all that writing, all you're right. I mean, all that broad knowledge that colleges nowadays they create the very well-rounded person, teach you a lot of stuff. And I was curious in terms of the business aspect of how well colleges in terms of like 911 was it very easily applicable to bring that business knowledge into the 911 sphere, or was it kind of like just it was nice to have the knowledge, but they're kind of really separate, or would you find them way more like you need one to kind of operate with the other?
I don't think you need one to help with the other. I think having the experience in the workforce helped me. So when I'm writing papers and when I'm doing research, um, typically we could pick our topic, and so I could pick one. I could pick a topic to write about that would uh, maybe not tie directly in with public safety and 911, but it would give me other knowledge that could that I could use. And I often tell people about the McDonald's story. There's that they had that lawsuit several years ago about the person who burned herself, and that was always kind of the whole
Mhm.
story wasn't told about that. And one of my professors in one of my classes was actually somehow involved in that case. And when you hear the whole story of how severe she was burned, then it takes on different meaning. And when you look at liability and you think about how you can become liable, uh, studying that case, it really wasn't like most in the general public felt. And so those kinds of things where you're studying liability and you're studying finance and project management, you can take all of that into this industry.
Mhm. No, that makes sense. It's there's so many different things that can lead to one accident. I mean, the individual just burns themselves, but what led up to it? I mean, you have whole industries in terms of like the government. Like when a plane crashes, you have the National Trade Safety Board. They spend months figuring out what was all the lead ups to that one incident. How can we better everything around that? So it's a great thing to apply to, especially to public safety when you're dealing with with people's lives, keeping all civilians safe in a community. Very, very, very important. So bring it around back a little more too in terms of career and everything. So when you came back to Michigan, you got the job over at St. Clair County. Now from there, when did the consolidation around all those counties start to begin, and how difficult was that process?
Well, the counties didn't consolidate. The city of Port Huron consolidated with the dispatch center that I was at, and um, for that county, there was one other small PSAP that was not interested in consolidating, but the consolidation of the big city into the dispatch center, that was that was a big thing. We had contracts and what are we going to do with the employees? How many employees do we need? Do we need more stations? There's there's so much in a consolidation, and that started. Oh, when I got there, I had to build a new center. I had a room that we were going to move into, but it literally was brick walls. So we had to finish that, and we had to finish a 800 megahertz project. So I would say right around year 3 after I started there, we did the consolidation with the other city.
Okay, just for some people who might not know, what is the benefit? What is the reason some cities choose to consolidate down? Is it for tax purposes, for cost savings? Is this easier for management? What are the benefits of consolidating down?
Well, I would say most people, most entities, agencies, cities, that when they're looking at consolidating, they are looking at saving money. Um, that's their number one priority. But there are so many other benefits of consolidation. For
Okay.
example, um, just having the extra experience. So when you have a bigger dispatch center, you have you have extra experience because you get more of a higher call volume. So your dispatchers are used to handling calls more frequently. So for example, if you're a smaller PSAP and you have a robbery take place within your agency, maybe those dispatchers are not as used to
Mhm.
handling robberies as if they're in a bigger center. So just the skill set of the dispatchers becomes stronger within a consolidation, and you have more access to uh, the assistance and the support of the other agencies that you're dispatching for, and that's really important. That's kind of a critical function of a consolidation. And then you only have to buy one set of whatever, a CAD or radios. You have them all in that one center as opposed to the different dispatch centers, each making their own purchases. And you don't usually need as many people unless the dispatch center is understaffed to begin with. And that's also a consideration for some agencies. Staffing nowadays is, when you open up a hiring process where you used to get 150, 200 applications and now you get 20. So it's really hard to keep PSAPs staffed. So it helps if there's a group like that in a consolidation.
No, that makes sense to make everything a little more easier and to provide a little more support for the dispatchers. Because that example you had, like a small community who rarely gets a robbery, if they get a robbery, that takes up a lot of resources for a small community that really is not used to having their morality shaken in that way in that community. So having a bigger public safety entity that has a bigger area, they've seen that. They have people who have seen that before, and they can then handle that a little better than maybe somebody in an area who doesn't know how to do that. So that makes perfect sense. So now you said you're bringing a bunch of people into a consolidated dispatch center. You have a bunch of different ideas, conflicts, and different perspectives you're bringing into this. Now, when you were invited to be the director of Sarisa, when they brought all these different centers together, how many different dispatch centers were consolidated down into Sarisa?
The initial consolidation, there were three centers, uh, but there was only one that had dispatchers. The other two agencies were being dispatched by sworn personnel and the fire departments. So if it was a police call, the officers would dispatch it. If it was a fire call, it was sent to the fire department and the firefighters would dispatch it. And only the one agency had dispatchers. So and then the other agency had part-time call takers. So we took all of those employees in the initial consolidation, and then we hired 6 or 7 more. We were going to have supervisors and full-time dispatchers and myself, and that's how we started Sarisa. you kind of have to know what the call volume is, and in order to know if you're going to have the right number of employees. And that was difficult because the dispatchers and the police officers especially, they were used to screening calls. Well, when you're in a PSAP, especially if you're not under the authority, if you're an independent PSAP, screening calls is not really a good practice. So all of those calls that were screened out, we didn't know. We didn't know what the call volume was. So it didn't take us long to realize that we needed more people than we had originally hired. So we were able to go back and hire more people, and then we consolidated another center within at Sarisa and hired a couple more people, and I I think just about everybody in the country is short staffed with dispatchers, but we at least have the correct number in the budget.
Right. Now, question for you. Now, when you first have a new consolidated dispatch center and you're trying to fight to get more employees, you're looking at all these call volumes and seeing what you need. Where do you go and how hard do you have to fight to get the extra employees you need to hire? Is it your decision as a director to hire more? Do you have to go to somebody else? What's the process of doing that? Like, how hard do you have to fight to get your center to operate in the way that you know it needs to operate to keep the community safe?
That's a good question, Zach. There are tools out there that you can use and I don't want to mention anyone specifically, but there are organizations out there that have tools that are really great because you can put in your call volume, your phone call volume, your 911 volume, your administrative lines, your calls for service, um, what other duties that you have done, and these programs, they calculate the number of people that you should have to be running efficiently. So for a center, as an example, who does emergency medical dispatch, EMD, those centers should have maybe a higher number because the dispatchers are expected to stay on the phone with the caller and ask, the proper pre-scripted protocol questions and give life-saving instructions if needed, depending on the call. So then you take that information and you present it to whoever is, able to. So able to make those decisions. For me at my organization, I would present it to our board, and that was comprised of 5 people. When I worked at other organizations, I would take it to the board of commissioners because they were ultimately, in charge of those kind of additional people. So I think it just depends on where you are. Some cities will need to take it to their city council or their city manager, but you just have to have your ducks in a row and make sure you have solid numbers for yourself and then the comparables around you with other numbers, and those programs are really helpful.
Right. No, that makes sense. It's funny how like nowadays, like tech does make the world so much more complicated, but at the same time, almost so much more easy. When you mentioned like 50 years ago, hate to bring up the 50 years ago mention again, right? When you're with your mom, you said they had the big microphone. The world was so different. Things were a little more, laid back. And nowadays, things are so high tech. With the birth of the internet, all these things there's so much more stuff out there that helps keep the community safe and all this stuff. Now, when you came into the 911 director position, what would you say is one of the most like helpful tools coming that seat like tech wise to help manage that? Like, what was the stuff you had to start like relearning how to do or learn how to do brand new in terms of managing a whole corporation, not really a corporation, a whole organization now in terms of that management position? What tools did you have ready to your hand that helped you do that?
Are you talking about technology tools or just that I was aware of?
technology tools, any tool that really helped you out?
Well, computers are really helpful because you can do so much with them, and but they can also hurt. Uh, when I started in 911, not to go back all those years, but when I started in 911, we didn't have computers. When we entered calls for service, we entered them on a little cardstock card and wrote everything out with a pen or pencil, and then it for our organization it went up a conveyor belt to where the dispatchers were. That was really interesting to have that knowledge of the background of where the profession was. So then when I became a manager at a new organization, I remember walking into the agency I was at in Michigan when I first moved back, and they had one of those old reel-to-reel recorders. I'm not sure if our audience is familiar with those, and maybe someone still has them, but they just giant tapes that recorded 24 hours, and then somebody had to go and switch them out, and then they would save them for whatever the retention schedule was, and then they were erased and reused. And that's what they had. So I had knowledge that the technology had changed significantly for recorders, and that you can record digitally, and so that was really helpful because I could take that agency and bring it kind of up to speed.
Essentially modernizing a local public safety area, right? As you said, in the area, now one was handled by the fire department's part-time call takers. You essentially you created a public safety answering position. You essentially did in that area out of scratch, modernizing that industry. It's very interesting to see how that came about because Sarisa wasn't a thing before it was modernized. Essentially, it came out of the modern world, which is very cool. So you guys kind of got to build your own process out of nothing but something, right?
Right, and that's how I've described it too. We started a dispatch center where one did not exist before. New building, new technology, everything was new. There was so many things I would do differently, having gone through that experience if I ever had the chance. But I still think that we did pretty well with what we had.
Now, when you say you would do things differently, do you mean like do things differently in terms of like, oh, I made like a mistake of inexperience or a mistake of I just went down the wrong road? What do you mean when you say, oh, do things differently?
Well, I mean, sorry. I mean, when we talk about setting up a new dispatch center where one didn't exist before, there are so many decisions you have to make, like how your positions are and the carpet or not carpet. And you have to have a raised floor so that all of your wiring and cabling can go underneath it. And, I came from a dispatch center in Colorado that had windows and a porch. And so when I started Sarisa, we were literally in the middle of a building with brick walls. And, I wish I could have changed that for them and given them some natural light because there's so much information out there now about how important lighting is in a dispatch center, that I wasn't aware of then. Not to mention the recording capabilities and the radios that we used. There was just carpet seems like a no-brainer. Carpet will help deaden the sound, but it really gets so dirty that there were times I wished I had not done carpet. I'd seen dispatch centers with just the flooring. That's what I would have actually That's what I would have really actually gotten.
Wow, something that seems so like trivial, right between carpet or hardwood floors. That's kind of funny, but you're right about the natural light. Something you really wouldn't think about, even when people work from home nowadays. Not even just public safety, really almost most industries nowadays, a lot of people have the ability to now work from home, and you have people that wake up in a dark room, they keep their blinds closed in a dark room, and it kind of puts you in a funk. And in terms of being a dispatcher and dealing with all those high intense calls, it really takes a toll on you long term. So that does make a lot of sense. I definitely understand that. So, kind of pulling it back to a different topic here, when as the director of 911, how many did you ever get to invited to other places to travel to see other centers around the country, around the state of Michigan? Were you ever invited to see other places? Is that a thing that happens around the country? Like, what are these like? Are there ways like to ever meet other 911 directors, meet with them, go see them at their places, have them come to you? What tools do you have with other directors around the country?
Well, so I was involved in state committees, NINA and APCO, both in Michigan and in Colorado. And I also was on the National NINA Institute board. And then when you go to national conferences, you get to travel. And so between all of those different things that I was involved in at state and national levels, I traveled all over the country, and it opens up a lot of doors for you to see other PSAPs. And when you're involved in organizations like that, you're usually interacting, networking with other directors. And so, they'll want to come and see your dispatch center and you go see theirs. And national conferences, they usually always have a tour that you can go see another dispatch center, and you take advantage of those as a leader, and you can bring back all kinds of really great information to help your dispatch center. And it isn't always about the technology and about the machinery, the actual hardware. Sometimes it's the lighting or, notification lights, those kinds of things. It's not always about the hardware.
Right now, without pointing fingers and taking names here, over all these different PSAPs you've been to across the country, what are some of the places that were lacking in terms of you know structural processes and lack of attention given to the details? What are some like examples you have of some bad things you've seen in the industry?
Well, there's agencies who just can't afford to have the computer aided dispatch. But when I think of bad things in the industry, I mostly think of what the people are doing. What the employees, the dispatchers, how they're, um, what kind of benefits they do or they don't have. Until I moved to Michigan, I'd never had any experience with unions. So just learning about those things and the policies you put in place that will help the dispatchers and the benefits that you can give them. And in the summertime, uh, once I became a leader, I will bring in ice cream like every month, enough ice cream for everybody, ice cream bars, sandwiches. And I always felt like if that could make the difference and make the employees happier, just little things like that, little acknowledgments. I used to have big employee recognition banquets. Um, Now I stopped doing those after a while because, if you have to pay somebody to come to a banquet, uh, it kind of loses its intent. But there are so many things that as a leader you can
Hmm.
try to help with your employees, and I always thought that was important. I saw a lot of places that did not do that.
So now, right? So it's interesting. I asked you like, what are some of the bad things you've seen, and you went right to the people. But the people you brought up, the only thing you're able to bring up was the example that you brought in, once somebody brings some ice cream for your dispatchers. So it seems like really that the biggest person that affects the people inside the PSAP, does it really come from the director and how well they run or whoever's in charge? Is it really like a top down in terms of morale? Like if the director doesn't really care for the employees, why would the employees care for the job? Do you kind of see it like that?
I personally do see it like that. I know that that's not always the case. I know that you can have a really dedicated director that cares about the people, and the people can still run askew. But I think in the agencies I've seen where the director has been really rough around the edges, um, yelling at people, cussing at them, throwing things at them. The people are unhappy, and they might stay because they have no place to go, you know. But boy, once that unhappiness starts, it just breeds through the organization, and then you have to come in and try and fix it. If you're brought in new, well, that's a rough thing to do. So it was always an honor of mine, especially once I moved to Michigan, that I got to come into organizations fresh and show them who I was, because I'd seen examples of what happens when people are not treated well. Just recognized for what they're doing and understanding that these calls that they have to take, they wear on you after a while. And as a leader of an organization, understanding that and helping your employees through that with programs or whatever, it's important.
No, of course, of course. It's also kind of interesting where, you said like, you have some directors who, when they don't have a good attitude, they make their employees, not, they don't feel liked, or they don't feel, or when they feel when they feel dispensable, I should say, when they don't feel like as if like they're worth being there, as if they're still could just be refilled. What sort of like ways do, I don't know if you know this or if you have this answer, but when you're working, what sort of ways do dispatchers have if they feel they have a director who really is just tearing down the function of the organization? Is there ways that dispatchers can kind of take a little more control and find a way to replace the director? What power do they have, or if they have any at all?
That really depends on the organization. They could, if they're under a police department, for example, they can go to the next highest one. The chain of command is important no matter what organization you're in. So, they can go to the next level and make complaints. But um, I think what you have to remember is the complaints have to have solid evidence of mistreatment, because um, you're talking to people who have been in the industry of public safety longer, and they've experienced a lot of different complaining at all different levels. So when you have a valid complaint, you just have to take that up. I know of organizations who have had sexual harassment cases against their director, and they've had to band together and go forward. But I've also seen organizations with bad leadership who have just taken on an internal power, without an actual title. They've just really grown strong that way, and that makes it hard for anybody coming in after their bad leadership person to try and do anything, because the internal strength of the dispatchers is so strong. Does that make sense?
Of course. No, of course. I mean, you see it with a lot of cases. I mean, especially one of the best examples you could say would almost be like think of a high school, for example. Like you have a classroom. If you have a teacher who has almost no control of a classroom, a bunch of these kids will have their own little way of running a class. Now, what happens when the substitute teacher comes in? They want to start doing things their way for the day. Do the kids listen immediately? Well, no, they have their own way of doing stuff. They never had somebody good in the leadership role that taught them how to do it. Now, I'm not calling all these dispatchers no children, but if there's no one in leadership, you create your own ways of processes and stuff. And really, it's the fault of the bad director. You know that you're on. It's on you, right? Is it not? It's on you to make sure your organization's run correctly. And if you have bad employees, you have to take care of them. And if you can't do that, maybe not the right person to be in the job, right?
Well, that's a tough question too, because um, sometimes you're tied. Your hands are tied. You might know that you have a employee who is borderline rough around the edges and causing disruption within your center, but actually getting the documentation needed to do a termination. Uh, I mean, you just have to be careful because negligent retention uh, talks about exactly what you're saying. But if you don't have your documentation clear and uh, you can terminate, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't get their job back. Or your policies have to be clear. So um, you could still be a really good director and have really disruptive poison employees.
Oh, I gotcha. It's almost like because the process of maybe getting rid of somebody can be so to a T, as we document so well that it's like you're directing with one hand tied behind your back sometimes, right? With some employees.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Oh, I gotcha. Now again, no, never have to say names if you don't. Have you ever had the experience where you had like a disgruntled employee that you didn't really know what to deal with, where you had to the point where you had to get rid of them?
Oh yes. Yep, I have. That's happened, and that's hard. That's
Of course.
that's a really hard place to be, because they're causing disruption. You might have even been the target of the disruption. No matter what you do as a director, nothing seems to help these employees. They're just going to dislike you because you're a director. And I think when people get into this line of work, they don't think about that. Even myself as an example, I just wanted to be a leader because I wanted to make a difference. And you don't you don't really think about, hey, people are going to hate me because of the title of my name. So that's just something that comes with the territory, I think.
Right. No, sometimes you can't. Right, so you can't control it. So again, go back to what you said about doing like the ice cream like once a month and how bringing like the extra smile to faces from your employees and the difference that can really make. So, question for you: have you ever had like a dispatcher who really showed like a such a good quality? Better question for you: what is like the best quality to look for in a dispatch when you see like, wow, they actually have like the love of doing this, not really the love of never the love of taking these calls, but they have a passion for being that person who takes that call, I should say. Is there a quality you actually look for in these dispatchers when you see like, wow, that person really does want to be here? They like being that person who answers that call because they have the heart it takes to help people in the community.
When you're doing interviews, you're looking for people who, um, seem to be very honest and open and understand the importance. I I think most everybody who I've ever hired, with the exception of just a couple people, uh, when I say, well, why this profession? Well, I want to help people. I want to make a difference. And sometimes I've gone back and said to them, okay, you're shifting here a little bit. Do you remember when we talked? You said you wanted to make a difference. What kind of difference do you want to make? So you look for people who want to give back to the community, Um, they have good personalities. They can multitask. Multitasking is really important in a good dispatcher. And then the ones who really shine. So I was on a committee through APCO for years, picking the dispatcher of the year and the director of the year, and what the people who really shined. Those were the people who didn't come in and do their job and go home, do their job and come home. Those people that were nominated for those awards of excellence, it's always because they came in, did their job, and then did something else. Maybe they took on extra projects, or they were mentors for young dispatchers and in a positive way. Those are the kind of qualities you look for to have your shining stars.
So my question for you was, Sherry, now throughout the whole time you've been in 911, is there any like friendships that you made that you still have today that have really made an impact on your life that you've actually made inside the public safety industry?
Well, other than my husband, who we met when I was dispatching in Estes Park, there I do have some friends. I have
Wow.
I have a friend who we started in Lakewood together 38 some years ago, and she and I have remained friends. And then my supervisor at the time in Lakewood, she and I have remained friends as well. And that's really nice to have that history, because we've all come through, at the same time together. And in each agency that I've worked in, there have been people who are special that we've stayed in touch with each other. And then throughout the country, the state and the country, there are other people in public safety that I have formed friendships with over the years and been able to stay in touch. We might not see each other because they live on a different place in the country, but we can talk. And then there's always Facebook, where we can message each other and keep track of each other's families, and that's been really special to have that kind of a circle of influence.
Oh, I guess that's quite amazing that you actually met your husband in public safety. That is very, very cool. And was your husband from Colorado?
Yes, he is a Colorado native. He used to tell people when he would introduce me, "Oh, this is my wife, Sherry. She tells me what to do when we're at home and at work," because I would dispatch for him. And he always got good laughs when he said that. So that was a lot of fun. I remember a call that we had where he was doing an arrest. It would be a felony stop of a possible homicide suspect, and the other dispatcher and I were working together, and he was responding to that call with another officer. And when you're doing that, when you're working, you have that kind of a relationship with the people you're dispatching. It's hard uh, because we knew it could go very bad. So we had everything set up in our minds, and you're going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and all the tasks, the chopper we would call if we needed to chopper him out, either one of the officers out for emergency. Well, we had everything set up beforehand as that stop was progressing, and I knew I could do that. I wasn't sure when it was all done how I would do, but luckily I didn't have to go through that. But I know other people throughout the country have had to go through those kind of calls, and but you get to work together, and that's fun too.
it it is funny. You get to work together, and there is a boss at work and at home, right? You get to boss around at work and at home. So that is a nice setup, a nice situation to have. Although, albeit it is also quite a stressful one too when you do have to send them out into a situation. So bringing back to another question, we had a whole bunch of questions here. Now, when you're traveling around all these countries and stuff, you did say before how everywhere there kind of is a lack of dispatchers to have. There's always a shortage of personnel. Are there reasons that you believe that there is shortages of dispatchers today? And how do you think you can get more people into the industry, good dispatchers to take these calls?
I guess I think the reason public safety as a whole, not just 911, but police and fire, we've just seen a decline in, applications and people who want to do the job. Certainly, in the last few years, public safety has not been broadcasted as a favorable profession. There's been a lot of controversy around it. And there have been officers and people who want to be officers who have decided, I don't want to go on the street, and they've gone into 911 instead. But, some of the applications that we've received, they have medical marijuana cards and they have felonies, and we can't hire that in our profession, and I think that has perhaps hurt us a little bit as a profession. That there are so many different acceptable things in non-public safety environment that you can do. So when you want to start being in public safety, we have restrictions, and I think that's hurt. And then I don't know why else we're having such shortages, other than just public safety in general is not high on the positive professions to be in at this time. We've talked a lot throughout the country, different committees that I've sat on, about really pushing the 911 industry and how we can promote that. And there's some high schools that have got on board with their local PSAPs and have allowed the PSAP to come right into the high school and do little job fairs and try and influence some of these kids early on. At Sarisa, we had a young man. He was 13 when he first started doing volunteer work for us, an outstanding artist. And he progressed. He went to college, and then another dispatch center hired him before we could. But that early influence, people just don't really even know what 911 is. Not completely. They know they need to call it, but as far as what it entails and that it is a actual career that you can start as a part-time person, and you can work your way up to the top and to national recognition, I don't think people understand that. And so if they're seeking something that is fulfilling, they might be looking for a fast track to a supervisor position or higher, and this profession isn't that, but it will still take people as far as they want to go to make the difference. And getting that word out,
right, and
that's important.
No, and that's very interesting, because most people, when they think of public safety, you think about whatever you hear on the news and all the time, but you don't realize that there's so much process, so much stuff behind the industry, I think behind the call that you make to 911. The person who answers, "Where's your emergency?" There's a lot of effort that goes into making sure there's somebody there to answer that phone all the time and stuff like that. It's very interesting, and most people don't think about that. So going to those schools and trying to recruit some younger people is very important. And you guys recruited a 13-year-old, and you did all the work recruiting them, and they went to a different PSAP hired them. That's not fair.
I know.
No, that's funny though. You guys get to actually support each other. That's awesome.
I was so bummed.
I know. You did all the work. You had this great person.
Yep, I was so bummed when we didn't get to hire him.
Would you say that they one of the best?
Go ahead.
Oh my gosh, I bet. So would you say probably one of the best ways to get more people in there would be now you said you went to the schools, doing the job fairs. Are there like you said he was volunteering? What are some volunteer programs that young people can do with some of these PSAPs? Some of them offer where they can kind of get more a little more hands dirty with public safety. Are there some programs some places offer, and what jobs do they have for some younger people?
Oh boy, I think it depends on the agency. So, we had this young man doing stuff for our public education program, and for the PSAPs who, I mean, it is my belief and it is my opinion that we should all be doing more public education. I realize that the virus really impacted us significantly over the past year and a half, but doing public education on what 911 is and when to call it, and those are great places for volunteers. But if you're using a juvenile, someone who's younger than 18, you have to have the parents fill out the forms, and the parents have to drive them there and drive them back if they're not 16, and they have to sign releases. But the stuff that they can do for the organization, there are things, but it depends on how the center is set up. When you watch that movie from a few years ago, The Call, did you ever see that movie?
Mm-hmm. With Halle Berry, right?
Yes. I finally watched it. I tend not to watch things about 911 on TV, and I was amazed. I mean, all the way up to the time she decided to leave her PSAP and go solve the crime. Spoiler alert. It was, the emotions they portrayed and the feeling of helplessness when you have somebody begging for help on the other end of the phone, and there's only so much you can do, and you're waiting for your responders to get there, and you're like, why are you taking so long? It's completely different in real life than sometimes how it's portrayed on TV. But there are other shows that take the camera right in.
Let me ask this question.
Yeah.
Would you say right? I mean, right nowadays we have that new show. I think it's on FX, that 911 show, really called 911. Now, question for you: did you say now that's actually more of a thing? You had The Call, you had that TV show that really kind of get a little more involved with with dispatchers, because now we're recognized as first responders, which is awesome. Now, would you say the way they're portrayed on TV is beneficial to the way 911 is perceived in the real world?
Not that particular.
911 specifically with the dispatch.
But not that particular show, because the 911 dispatcher never goes out and solves the crime. And I'll come back to that I'll come back to that in a minute. But the new shows, there's a Discovery 911 show, and we actually interviewed with them to have them do filming at our dispatch center. They sit right there next to the dispatcher.
Wow.
And they listen to all the calls, and they watch those interviews with those dispatchers. Those are real people. So the dispatchers at Sarisa that were interested in doing that, they were all screened, and then COVID hit, so they did not use the center. But that's pretty accurate, those portrayals.
Really? Yeah, that's very interesting. Now, like I said, kind of bringing it back to the question. Do you find now, in terms of the real ones, like Discovery Now One, they bring in release it down with the dispatchers, really listening to the calls, hearing the real stuff. Do you think it's kind of beneficial to bringing in more people into the industry? Do you think it's kind of because it is a very intense, scary job, and we're in a place nowadays where we say that now people are coming to 911, but we're in a world nowadays where so much more is known about 911, the ability to get more information out about 911 out there, like these TV shows, like all this stuff. Do you think do you think we need to kind of get a little more in the direct sit downs like Discovery does, where they actually sit down with you, have more real world stuff? You think the dramatics kind of make a little more too dramatic and stuff, like actually going out and solving the crime yourself? Do you think that is beneficial? Or do you think it's a little more too dramatic to be real?
I think that any information that can be out on 911, if it's positive, that would not hurt the industry. Um, I've
Mm-hmm.
talked to dispatchers who have said, they're taking a call and the caller actually thinks that they're going to show up on the scene. And I actually did that once in my career. I took the call. It was a bad accident.
Wow.
And I was, at that point, I was an EMT and working on the fire department. And they kept calling for more help and calling for more help and calling for more help. And I finally got a hold of my chief and I said, look, this is what's going on. And he said, go. And I go, well, cool. So that was really the only time I've ever taken the 911 call and responded to the scene. That's just not typical. But I think having people out there who understand that it's a different kind of a job, just like you can't get fingerprints off a rock, we don't always know exactly where the caller is, and that is an assumption that people
Mm-hmm.
make. So having shows that show that and portray that we have a general idea of where you are depending on the technology that's in that area. If you're calling a cell phone, we might not know your address, but there's technology available that can help us. So having people understand that, I think, would help the profession as a whole. When we get somebody new and we hire them, and we've always required at every center that I've been a leader in that the applicant, before they can proceed, they have to do a 2 to 4 hour sit along in the center, because well, we have people
Wow.
do that sit along and say, oh, I don't want to do this. And that's although that's really depressing for us when we're trying to hire somebody to fill an opening, it's so much better to get them in there and explain things and let them see things and have them make that determination then, as opposed to putting them through a training program and having them not be able to fulfill it, 4 or 5 months in.
Now, having the sit-ons before you put into that process, is that something that you started over at Sarisa, or is that something you noticed from some other places doing? How did that program come about?
That was just something I thought was important, and we implemented it because we were getting people um, failing out of the training program because they didn't have any idea. So we incorporated a couple things. We incorporated a mandatory orientation is the very first thing that people have to do. And so they come in and they're allowed to bring one significant other person with them, and it's all the good, the bad, and the ugly about the profession. And that's been good because we've had people right there stop and say, this isn't what I thought. And that may seem like,
Wow.
counterproductive, but it's so much better to have it done early on than, try and hire them and start training, because it's expensive. You've got your trainer and now you've got a trainee, and you pay them both, and you send them to training or you set up training, and those are dollars for your organization that, if you can find out early on that this isn't what the person really thought it was, and they don't have any interest in it at all, that's a better time to have that decision made before they actually start. So that's why we did it, and it's worked really well so far.
Well, no, that's awesome. That makes perfect sense because you're right. If it's the same reason why, like in so many places, you want to have people make that choice before all this equipment is put in. Because now, especially now, you don't want to make that mistake and don't just go through the assumption phase where I can do this. I know I'm going to do it. It's a quote cool job. I'm going to do it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. It's on TV. All this stuff. and you sit down and you really hear those calls and you hear that responsibility that a dispatcher has to take. It's on you to communicate with that person who's having an issue to your police officer who has no idea what the issue is. It's on you. It's a big, big job. So people need to have an understanding of how it's a big responsibility. So that makes a lot of sense having sit down beforehand, really understanding this is a big, important job. If you want to go through this, this is what it's going to be like. Just prepare for that. That's very, very interesting. I like that a lot. So just going back to a little bit other topics. We do over here that you were the PSAP director at Teresa for multiple years. Now, nowadays, what are you doing now? You're leaving. It looks like you're getting ready to leave Teresa in the next couple months, next couple of years. What are your plans nowadays?
Oh, the hardest thing, it truly was the hardest thing I had to do is make the uh, decision to step down as a PSAP director because, frankly, I just wasn't ready to leave 911. But I have a situation with my family that um, that I needed to address, and I needed the flexibility of not being a director. And so, what am I going to do? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Sarisa did keep me on to help with succession planning, help with our new director there, and I had some projects I was trying to finish up. And so they did give me a 1 year part-time contract that gives me the flexibility I need um, to help in the transition. Um, but after that, when that's over, I I don't know. I like being an equiture because it allows me to be able to share information and give back, and you know hopefully maybe still make a difference. Um, but I guess if something came up that had the same flexibility in a PSAP, I or in the 911 in the actual 911 field, I might be tempted to look at that, but where I'm at right now is good and solid, and I enjoying what I'm doing. So that's important. I think it's a cornerstone. 911 has been a cornerstone in my life. I've raised all my children working as a dispatcher, and they know nothing different than public safety. So it's it's just been an amazing career. It was so hard to walk away that last day.
Well, Sherry, it's quite amazing the fact that you've been in this industry for so many years, and really, you said it's been a cornerstone of your whole adult life since your whole life in general. Your mother was in public safety; she was a dispatcher. At 18, you chose to go into this field. At 19, you moved to Colorado. You worked as a call taker. You worked up the ranks. You got a degree while still working in public safety. It's quite amazing. And really, industries of public safety are so lucky to have individuals like you who really see the commitment, really want to make a difference in that industry, and put that passion towards it. You went to school for leadership. You got your master's in Michigan after you got your majors in Colorado because you saw the benefit. You did it while you were raising kids, while you were working. That's quite amazing. And the fact that even nowadays, you have a family of kids and you have other commitments that come up that made you have to step down from 911, and you still chose to, in some way, figure out how to still make a difference in a way where you get a little more liberty over your time in your life, right?
That's a good summary. Yes.
No, that's quite amazing. Really, I think Equiture's lucky to have you now. I think public safety is beyond lucky to still have you now and have you for the last 40 years because it's the individuals like you who really make those differences and put the people in this seat to answer the 911 call when somebody needs help. And to see that passion on somebody's end, it really shows that, like, wow, it's amazing that people still have that want to make a difference for others in their community. Quite an amazing quality you have.
Well, thank you. I I'm saying thank you because that's a proper thing. It feels funny hearing that back from you because in everything I did, I just did it because, it sounded like something that would be able to help. Or, when I was on the Nina Institute board, I got on the Institute board because it's a certification process for dispatchers to help them, and managers and even commercial partners, to have personnel have a deeper, broader understanding of what 911 is. And when I got on the National EMS Advisory Committee as the nation's 911 representative, I did it because I thought, oh well, I can put input into this committee, and we can make differences, and we can recommend changes. And I think if you check your motives of when you're doing things like that, I feel like that's what keeps you sane. It keeps you focused and energized. And not that in my career there haven't been moments where it's just been rough, but it's I think it's what your focus is that helps you do all of those things.
No, of course, and it's all choice to make you do those things. And I have this philosophy, and I truly believe that everybody makes decisions in some sort of self-serving purpose, and whether or not that's in terms of a selfish act, but I believe that as individuals like you who see they get their value and their gratitude and their pleasure of life from helping others. You saw that join the committee, like I get to make decisions that are going to help others. That makes me feel good. So in reality, you could be considered the most selfish person in the world because it made you feel so good to be part of a difference being made. So it's very interesting. I can call you selfish because you want to join all these boards, you want to join these committees, you go to all these places because for you that's where you got your gratitude, you got your purpose in life, your pleasure in life through making a difference through helping other people through doing that. It's quite an amazing thing. I love that. Everybody is self-serving in some way, and the fact that you do it in a way that helps others, that's where you get your true pleasure. I think that's why people know who you are. That's why people remember who you are. That's why you're invited to be on those committees. That quality in and of yourself, I think, is what made the biggest difference in your life. I truly believe it. In terms of your career, I mean.
Right. I agree. I think if throughout all professions, you see people who want those titles and those promotions because of the title. And those people might keep those titles, but to really, give back, I think it has to be more than a title.
No, absolutely. And truly, if it's just a title, if it's just a title to you, I think people know that. Other professionals, they know that. If you had another director, they just want to be there because it's the title of director. You know that as a fellow director, you kind of get that perception. You kind of can see the difference in their commitment and the way they treat others, right? You have those bad directors who didn't treat their employees with the value they had. There's probably that little dry difference of maybe they just want to be here for the title. They don't have the same love of the community as I do. So it's quite amazing. It really is.
Well, I've certainly met a lot who have, strong passions for their people and the profession. And, those are the people that I like to be around, I believe there's a saying, I don't know who said it, but, always surround yourself with success, other people who are where you want to be in a career, or have the knowledge you want to have. You surround yourself with people like that, and you're going to naturally, move in that direction.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. All right, Sherry. So as our last question, I'm going to ask you this. So over the last I'm gonna do my estimate. I'm gonna say 40 years. I know you're gonna be mad at me for saying that. I'm gonna just round up to 40 years. Over the last 40 years, getting the degrees, raising your kids. What is the thing you would say kept you sane over your crazy career?
I don't think it could just be one thing, but I have a very strong, supportive family. And I think if you don't have a supportive family, I think that it would be near impossible, to have a career like this because, some days you come home and you're all a mess because of the call that you had to take. You
Mm-hmm.
heard somebody dying on the phone, you heard people begging for help. Um, Without the supportive family, I I would have a hard time saying that you can, you know, keep focused and keep sane. Um, but I also had some really great mentors within the profession that sometimes I could just talk to about, things going on and uh, just having that outlet and not keeping it all bottled inside. That's important. I have a strong faith. I like to exercise. You put all those together as a package, and those are the kind of things that keep you sane during a crazy career.
Wow, no, that's amazing. Well, Sherry, I guess Equator is beyond lucky to have you and your wealth of knowledge and your wealth of passion, honestly. And I think public safety has been even more lucky to have you over the last 40 years. So I think we're gonna enjoy having you more on this podcast, start leading other stuff, and start having more discussions. And I'm very happy we got to do this.
Well, thank you. That's very humbling. I appreciate those words.